funny, passionate, authentic, emotional. Thank you. A big applause again, please. Was wonderful. It's a privilege to be here to listen to you. And now please welcome co-founder and co-organizer of Porto's Climate Change Leadership Conference and Summit, Pancho Campo.
Thank you.
He will be moderating Vice President Gore's questions. Thank you.
Wow. You know, you and I, we've worked a few times together, and I must say that I have never seen you with so much energy, and I congratulate you for that, because we need guys like you with this energy, and you know, the older you get, you're more inspiring and more energetic, and again, please, big round of applause.
Well, thank you. I guess, you know, just before I came on, I met with the Portuguese members of the climate project, and they inspired me, but thank you.
Now the question, it's a two-part question. Is that energy coming from you becoming vegan?
You know, I don't really talk a lot about being a vegan. I've only been a vegan for 8 years. Honestly, every once in a while, I will sometimes supplement a little seafood, not often. But I have been a vegan for the last 8 years. I don't proselytize about that because I think that diet is a very personal choice, and some people's doctors will say you need to have this, you need to have that, and none of my business. It is significant that it takes 7 to 8 pounds of plant protein to make 1 pound of beef protein, and some similar fraction for other meat protein. I just did it as an experiment to see how I felt, and I felt better, so I continued doing it.
I want to thank you for acknowledging the Porto Protocol, but do you see the Porto Protocol being an inspiration for other industries?
Absolutely. And Pancho, I think what you and your colleagues have done is important not only for the wine industry, but as an example for what other industries can do. And that's particularly important. When I shift in my presentations, as you just saw me do, from the reasons why we have to change and why this is so dangerous, to the sources of hope and optimism, which are very real, I emphasize electricity production, electric vehicles, energy storage, efficiency. But even if we are 100% successful in all those sectors, that still leaves industry, business, agriculture, forestry, ocean management. And so in industry and in business, sector by sector, the kind of leadership that we've seen emerge here in the Iberian Peninsula, in the wine industry, is really a model for what other industries and business groups can do.
Thank you. Just for your information, you know, we prompted these questions to a lot of the speakers and the audience before, so Vice President Gore could prepare some of the answers. The next question is how can we ask the population to change their habits, our economic model, our values, when the majority of the planet struggles to make it to the end of the month?
Well, in the second part of that question, the majority of the planet struggles to make it to the end of the month. They are the ones that are most harmfully impacted by the climate crisis. They have the most to gain by solving the climate crisis. And if you think back for a moment to the slides that I showed about the mobile telephone revolution, and the difference between the growth in the rich countries and the growth in the developing countries? That's that same enhanced opportunity for the poor of the world, those who live in the developing countries by and large, is true in renewable energy, battery storage, electrified transportation, sustainable agriculture and forestry. They have the most to lose, they have the most to gain by making these changes. So it's certainly true that the rich countries should feel an obligation and do have an obligation to help the poor countries make this transition because they don't have the resources. But it's in their interest to do it anyway. And by the way, there is an incredible flow of private investment into these developing nations to profit from this shift over to the sustainability revolution.
How can we influence our governments to remove active, systemic, and structural supports for businesses profiting from fossil fuels?
Yeah. By becoming politically active, and you know, I'm quite aware that it's different from country to country, but most of us understand others by projecting from our own personal experience. And I know from my own personal experience, even though I lived a previous lifetime in politics, it feels like a hassle to get involved in the political system right now in my country and exert influence on people. But I do it anyway. And I would encourage you to do it. So much is at stake. We cannot rely on individuals making changes in their own lives. That's important. I want to encourage you and myself to do that. I do it. But the big changes will only come when we change policies, eliminating the subsidies for fossil fuels, as you referred to in your question, in speeding up the requirements for utilities to move to solar and wind, et cetera. And this is an unusual time when revolutionary scale political activity, not revolutionary activity, you know, we all read in the history books about the age of revolutions, and it's hard to imagine leaving our comfortable lives and going out on the barricades and, you know, one more day, all of that stuff. But that scale of commitment in the modern world to make campaign contributions, to go to the meetings that elected officials have, to support these grassroots organizations that are doing the hard work. This is the time to really get involved in that kind of stuff. And the grassroots activists, sometimes they give you the impression that they're a little wild-eyed and so forth. Actually, they're the ones that are driving the change now. And when those of us who have very comfortable lives, you know, and nice houses and nice cars, and we don't really have to worry a lot about it, now is the time for us to give some resources to these grassroots activists who are really driving the change. It may sound crazy to you, but we've got to get involved. And by the way, now's the time for some of us to go out on the streets. And I've gone out and I never thought I would march on the White House. I used to work in the White House, for God's sake. But anyway, now's the time.
Yeah, there's a study from the International Environmental Research that says that having one less child is the best way to reduce carbon footprint. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I understand what they're saying. And I showed you the population graph of China, India, Africa. I've written a half a dozen books on climate, and in every one of them, I've had at least one chapter on population. Every time it changes a little bit, but I'll tell you what I've learned over the last 40 years. The population growth in our world has utterly transformed the relationship between humanity and nature. I said that earlier. But it is a success story unfolding in slow motion. In Europe, in the United States, except for immigration from Central America, in Japan, in many other parts of the world, we have seen a sharp stabilization of population growth. In some countries, we're seeing declines in population. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. 30, 40 years ago, France and Sweden both had sharp declines in population. They were caught in what the demographers call a fertility trap. They solved that problem. How? By giving 2 to 3% of their GDP to child care for women to participate in the workforce, family support, other programs that make it possible for women to join the workforce and continue to have children if they wish to bear children. The key is it should be up to women and their partners. And government policies that try to determine how many children a woman wants to have, forget about it. Let women decide, and their partners, but give them the flexibility to make that decision. So let me say one more thing about this. On a global basis, what we've seen is a shift from one equilibrium state to another. And bear with me, this sounds a little geeky, but bear with me. One equilibrium is large families, high birth rates, high death rates. That used to be the equilibrium state in most of the world. Was in my country, was in Portugal. There's a second equilibrium, small families, low birth rates, low death rates. All over the world, we're seeing a movement from the first equilibrium down an S-curve to the second equilibrium. Why does that happen? It happens inexorably when 4 conditions are present, and all 4 have to be present. Number 1, the education of girls. Number 2, the empowerment of women to participate in the decisions in families, communities, nations. Number 3, the nearly ubiquitous availability of fertility management. Some people use the phrase birth control. I don't. Control is a phrase that people in developing countries say, hands off. Condoms, other forms of fertility management, if people want to use them, they should be available. Most important, the 4th one, a continued decline in child and infant mortality. Because, as an African leader said 80 years ago, Julius K. Nyerere, the confidence by parents that their children will survive to adulthood is the most powerful form of contraception. When all 4 of those conditions are present, automatically families prefer smaller families. That's been true for at least 10,000 years, okay? Now, the reason Africa is an outlier is because Western nations, my own unfortunately the principal villain here, has not followed through on the commitments to make fertility management available in African countries. We're making progress in educating girls and empowering women and reducing child mortality. We need more fertility management. But leave it up to families, leave it up to women. Give them the education, the knowledge, the empowerment, the means, and then it'll automatically happen.
Thank you. Before you acknowledge the, yeah. At the beginning of your presentation, you acknowledged Taylor's as the main sponsor of the Ministry for the Environment, my team, who are my family. But I would like to acknowledge, I didn't mention this to you, the Taylor's team led by Tania Oliveira. And because this is a wine event, the last question is, I know you tasted some good port backstage. What do you think of it?
I know in Spanish, but is it proper to say in Portuguese, fantástico?
Yes. We would like to continue, but Vice President Gore has a tight agenda for tonight. I want to thank you. I've been honored to be part of the Climate Reality Project. It's a great honor to be moderating this session. I think I speak in behalf of the audience, in behalf of Portugal, in behalf of Taylor's. You have been the inspiration and the cherry on top of the cake of this Climate Change Leaders Summit. Thank you so much.
Obrigado. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good job. Good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, Mr. Al Gore, for your inspiring speech and sharing with us.